Oh my gosh, Lisa, we did it. Number
100
100.
freaking episodes. Can you
Woo.
imagine? Did you ever guess?
No, not in a million years. When we started this podcast 2 years ago, right around this time, like who would have ever thought that we would hit the 100th episode, number one, and number two, how it's evolved so much. And in fact, this episode, I'm as excited about this episode as I was our very first episode because of who we have as our guests on today.
I'm into it. I'm into it. So, all right, folks, we're going to be doing something completely different. You notice I didn't even start up with our welcome back, but welcome back. Thank you for joining us today. We're so excited about this episode because for the first time ever, instead of just interviewing one guest, we've got two, and we're going to do a little bit of a round robin panel discussion on something, one of the words in the name of our show, which is somewhat controversial, maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe. Yeah. So when we started this and we chose our name, I was more worried about the word bossy than I was about the word badass. Right?
Yes.
I was more worried about that, but we were so sure that this was the name. And one of the things I remember you saying to me, and that we use in the tag of the show, is find and unleash your inner badass. And that is what we are all about. And I think that is what these two ladies represent. So we're excited to have them. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce them both.
Yeah.
So first up, we have Spencer Snakard. So Spencer is a coach who has been with us in one of our previous episodes. Actually, both these ladies have been with us in our previous episodes. Spencer talked about fulfillment of life. I cannot remember the exact name of your episode, but we're going to put that in the show notes. And it's interesting because both of you, Sarah is our next guest as well, Sarah Walton, also a coach. So you might be guessing a theme here. Also a coach. Sarah joined us and we talked about the upper limit problem with Sarah as well. So, right. So I think we enjoyed those conversations so much. We wanted to have you back, and we wanted to have you back for our 100th episode, where we're going to talk about today what it means to be a badass.
Yes.
Welcome, Sarah. Welcome, Sarah. Welcome, Spencer. Say hi.
Hi. Hey. So happy to be here. Oh my gosh, let's badass this thing.
I'm with you, Sarah. Let's do it. Let's do it. All right. So we're going to we're just going to get right into it. What does it mean to be a badass? Right? So Spencer, I'm going to start with you. What comes to mind when I say that?
Yeah, the first thing that comes to my mind is owning your awesomeness. It was fascinating to me when you said that it's controversial, because I'm like, what's controversial about that? But it's all a matter of perspective, right? 100%. But yeah, to me, it's about really owning your awesomeness and, standing in your power and not being rattled by, or not being, maybe not that we never get rattled, because I think we all have upper limit problems. I love that Sarah and I ended up on this episode, because that's a lot of what I talk about too.
Yeah.
No accidents. But so, I mean, I think we all have like our moments of imposter syndrome or feeling rattled a little bit. To me, being a badass is not being stopped by it and growing, not even necessarily just in spite of it, but because of it sometimes as well. Like sometimes those challenges and things that rattle us can feed us to grow even bigger and stronger and beyond what we previously would have been.
100%. Wonderful. Sarah, what do you think, Sarah?
Oh, heavens. There's like a 95-minute conversation happening inside my head all by myself. But I think, what was coming to mind is when I agree a lot with Spencer. I think it's that not being able to be rattled. I call it not being hookable, right? And I think at the heart of that, and I am just so on this soapbox right now, I am on this for women in 2022, but is to tell the truth. And I think that is so effing hard for us. You know, we talked about, when I was on the show last time, we talked about this high functioning codependence that's going on for so many women, and this idea that everybody else's needs matter but ours. And while we can build our businesses off of that, and I think a lot of us have, and there's a lot of badassery going on inside of that, I think what would really make someone badass is their ability to tell the truth, especially when it's hard. And so there's kind of two parts. You got to tell the truth, and then you got to take what you get after you tell the truth. And I think that is what a badass is.
I love it. So we're definitely coming back to both of those. But Liz, my dear friend and dear co-host, come on, what do you think it means to be a badass?
Well, you know, I really want to kind of piggyback off of what you ladies have just said, is really the theme around telling the truth. And I think that for me, telling the truth really looks like honing into what is happening with me and my system in the moment. And if there is a part of me that is feeling critical, or a part of me that is feeling something else, just owning that and knowing, okay, that's happening for me. And that's truthful in the moment, right? And saying, you know, that's okay. That's just that's a part of me that has validity to it in terms of protection or what have you. And just, creating space inside so that I can feel authentic in my truth. And what does that look like? And it looks different every single day for me. Like when we first started out with this pre-chat and we were all laughing and giggling and excited and talking, that's being in my truth too, just honoring kind of like the moment to moment authenticity of what's happening and what's happening inside.
Yeah, excellent. I love all of what you've said, but Spencer, I particularly loved where you started, which is just kind of embodying your awesomeness, because that's kind of what I feel like it's for me, which is this idea of, I kind of translate it to confidence, but it's not even so much confidence. I think that's the word I can find that I feel like will kind of capture it all. That makes sense. But the truth is, it's just sort of like knowing who I am, understanding who I am, living in that space of this is who I am and it is what it is, and I'm happy with it. So I kind of think my next question goes back to sort of like, what causes us to not sort of own who we are? Because one of the questions that I find that I get sometimes when I'm talking to people say, oh my God, you're so great. You're so this, you're so that. And I'm just sort of like, me? No, girl, you have no idea. You have no idea the mess that is happening here, sometimes here, like you have no clue. So what causes us to not sort of embrace our awesomeness?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm happy to run with that.
Go ahead, Spencer.
So I wanted to just like make a connection too before I answer that, which I think will lead into it with, I love that Sarah brought up about telling the truth, and you circled back to the owning of the awesomeness. Cause to me, that is part of our awesomeness, is the truth about who we are, for all that we are and for all that we're not. When I say the awesomeness, it's not just the things that are sort of culturally perceived as the good stuff or the incredible stuff or the great stuff. It's all the stuff. It's like everything that we are. And so I think when you said, what has us forget that, it's really forgetting who we are. I think on our first episode, we talked some about, I feel like so much for me lately has boiled down to this sort of distinction or recognition of who we are as spiritual beings versus who we are as human beings. Yes. And really then figuring out how to mesh those two together, bringing all of your spiritual self, who you really are, what you're here for, what really matters to you, into your whole human experience. And so I think I had this epiphany like a year or two ago that was a little nuts in the moment that I had it, of how I feel like all of us, when we forget our badassery and we forget how awesome we are, it's because in some form we think we're not enough. And I had this epiphany of like, oh my God, in some ways we're kind of not enough, because who we really are as spiritual beings is like these all powerful, all knowing, like super connected, flowing, no limits beings outside of these physical bodies. And then we come into these physical bodies and we're limited. We're bound by by gravity and the span of our life cycle and all that kind of stuff. So it's like we have this daily reminder of what we're not. And I think we then take that on as like, I'm insufficient, I'm lacking in some way, but it's just because we've forgotten, like, we're really the spiritual beings. We're not these human bodies.
Yeah. Yeah. Sarah, I see you shaking your head a lot. Well,
Oh, heck yeah.
All of us
Yeah.
are. So talk to me. How does that sound to you?
Yeah, no, I think that there's a lot of truth in that. And I also think coming at this from the angle I study so much, right? So I specifically working with women and how to be badasses, basically like, how do you stretch yourself? How do you grow? How do you make more money? How do you do these things? And I think a lot of it, along with that idea that we forget who we are, right? Spiritual beings in a physical body. If that's the perspective you want to look at, it's the same either way. But I think as we're being raised in female bodies, we're also taught not to express what we need over and over and over and over. Like, be quiet. Your tears are making me uncomfortable. Like, your needs are making me uncomfortable. And we get taught that. And I think that really sort of cements in this idea. We already have these worries. We're not enough. We can feel that things aren't quite like, there's more for me. We can feel that. And people are like, don't talk about that. That makes me uncomfortable. And so it's like, oh, okay. So we shrink back into that. And again, that goes to the high functioning codependence, right? Because if we're making other people uncomfortable by being great, especially as women, we start rocking boats. So we simmer back down and we get quiet. And I think that's a big piece of why we don't own more of it. And it's also why on the inside, we're like, yeah, like you said, I love when you said that, Lisa, dude, if you only knew what was going on. Like, part of that is like, I'm a freaking mess over here and there's so much I want to do and nobody's listening. Like, people have that feeling. And I think as women, it's really amplified. And I think that plays into that entire side of why we don't step into that more.
Yeah. Liz?
Absolutely. Yeah, I love what you guys just said there. And, forgetting who I am and really the essence around, where did I start off? I loved what you said, Spencer, too, about the spirituality piece. And also, where did I start off as a kid, as a child? And what brought me joy then? And what has happened along the way in my life, trauma or what have you, that where I feel like I'm not being connected back around to those little kids inside, because I believe that there's more than one. And oftentimes, I can speak for myself really, is that I feel like if I'm comparing myself to other people, let's just say, or I'm in a place of having parts of me, I use IFS a lot, that's no secret, I talk about that a lot on the show, internal family systems, is just these different parts, voices, what have you, protectors, kind of crowding into that space inside, which really holds, I think, our true essence, right? Our confidence, our creativity, our clarity, our connectedness. And when I allow myself to be present, then that space is more created for me to then connect to that kind of younger, more joyful part of me, which, by the way, keeps me in the present, doesn't wrap me up into my head and take me away somewhere else. So for me, that is my true essence.
So this is excellent. This is probably why I was so excited, right? Because all three of you just said something very different. And to me, it all connects, right? In a way. So Spencer, you're talking about this idea of where we come from, where we started. We're these spiritual beings, but we're trapped in these bodies. So that is our first set of limitations. And then Sarah and Liz kind of said something similar, but in different ways, which is we're children. And as children, all the way till growing up and still as adults, like you're saying, Sarah, we keep getting told, no, don't do that. You're making me uncomfortable. I don't feel good. Stop it. Also, you're a woman. What are you doing? Right? So all these things, but just this idea that you already are, right? You already are. So it's like, okay, how do we find her? How do we embrace her? And how do we push her forward? So that's my next question. How do we find her? How do we embrace her and push her forward? Because this is all about the ladies today. Who wants to take it?
I love it.
Liz?
I love it.
Sarah? Spencer?
Well, I don't want to jump in there, but that was a
Go ahead,
really
Sarah.
great question. I'm like, oh my God, I'm like so excited. But how do we find her? Again, I think it's going to go back to telling the truth. Like, I want to live my life this way, or I want to be ambitious, or I want to stay home, or whatever these things are. I want that, like my soul, my heart, my brain are calling out for these things. And so I think it's a matter, it sounds so silly, but it's literally just giving ourselves permission to say what we want. And that's what I meant by telling the truth, right? You just got to be like, I hate this life. And there's a lot of people like, I want to pivot this, and this is not working for me. And to say that out loud, I think that's how we find her. And then the second part is moments like this. I think, how do we, encourage her and keep her inspired? It's with other women. And I say that all the time. It's going to be other women giving other women permission, because we're the worst offenders at the, hey, can you simmer down with that? Oh, you work. Oh, you stay home. Oh, you did this. Oh, it's like, we're like, what is going on there? So I think that's a big part of it. Like that expansion and us doing things like this, where everybody gets to come in a different angle and like really expand. And then how do we push that forward is I think we walk arm in arm with each other. I really, really believe that it's going to take us with each other to continue to move conversations like this forward. That's why I got excited to jump in. Sorry.
Go ahead.
So cool.
Girl, don't be sorry.
So cool.
Everybody jump in.
Oh, so excited.
But I love that, Sarah, because as you're talking, I'm like, oh, can we do the, first I'm transported back to my gender studies class, right? Where we talked about status quo, because like you said, women are the worst offenders. We're the ones who want to maintain the status quo because we want it to be comfortable for ourselves, because I think sometimes the fight feels hard, right? It just feels like hard, and we're fighting against so much and a lot. But the second piece is, I'm like, is this about to turn into one of those episodes that we talk about misogyny? Because we can do that too.
There's so many directions to go here, right?
Because we could do that too. But no, Spencer, what do you think? Like, how do we find her? How do we embrace her and push her forward? Make sure she's out there in the world.
Yeah, I think, I fully agree with Sarah with starting with, what do you want? And that's one of the first questions I always ask my clients is like, all right, let's take away all the whatabouts and logistics and all the things, all the limitations that we immediately put on ourselves, and be like, okay, magic wand, perfect life. What do you really want? So it's a great place to start. And to me, that falls in that spiritual side of things, of who we are, what we're here for, and what really matters to us, including what we want. I always kind of say with some degree of pride that I called my husband in my life by getting really clear about what I wanted. So what you want is a great place to start. And then I think that sort of the next step to that I like to go and explore with people, or that shows up along the way, is how some of those aspects of our humanity then can interfere with that. Like, we think we want it, or we even know in our heart that we want it, but then there's ways that we sabotage it unknowingly, subconsciously, because of fears of things like, what are people going to think of me? Or, well, who am I? Those ways that we feel we're not enough. And a lot of times that really just boils down to this identity that we've taken on to make up for what we think we lack, so that we will fit in, be accepted, not be told to simmer down now. It's funny. I love, Sarah, that you brought that up, because I was I've always been a very outgoing and energetic person, but I was a bit of a gregarious child, and I'd be very loud and bam, here I am. And it became very apparent by like mid elementary school, if not sooner, that people were like, yeah, like bring it down many, many notches. And we shrink, we start to shrink down and put ourselves in boxes and become who we think people want us to be. And the thing with identities is, in many ways, they help us succeed. They help us get where we are and achieve these amazing levels of success that we achieve. But they also can be very limiting, because it's like, on some subconscious level, if I'm not that, then everything's going to turn to hell. Yeah. Who am I if I'm not that? And what disastrous things are going to happen if I take all my safety controls out of check? So a lot of it is even just recognizing like, well, what's this identity I'm living into? And then taking those really bold, sometimes very scary, courageous steps to be like, all right, let's start peeling off the layers of the armor and tell the truth, get more real about who we are, and show up authentically and take those risks that someone's not going to like what's under the armor.
Yeah, 100%. And I like that you were saying that, because again, it made me think of something interesting from childhood, which I know, Liz, I'm coming to you next with a question, which is, a story I tell is, when I was growing up, I was always told to stop asking why.
Mm.
And the response was always because I said so. Right. And it wasn't until I started, and for years, I did not ask why, because it's none of my business. But if I wanted to know something, I'd go research it. So I developed this extra part of my personality, which was I sated my curiosity, not by asking other people, but by doing it, figuring it out for myself. Right. So good, bad, whatever. But when I started coach training and was again given the permission to like ask questions, because questions are how you get answers, right? Even of just yourself. It is so crazy to me. And we talked about this a little bit before of how we just get blunted because we're showing up for other people and not ourselves. So telling the truth 100%. But Liz, I'm curious of like, what do you think about this whole idea of showing up for other people, right? And how we kind of minimize that, change that within ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, it's super interesting, right? Because I know for myself, I grew up in a very codependent family. So I developed parts that were very codependent, wanted to take care of other people. And through a lot of work, discovering that underneath that, I was getting something from that. I was getting fed by that, right? And so finding her, you can look at that in a couple of different ways. But for me, finding her is the theme of what we're talking about, just wanting to know the truth. And that's first, being curious about myself and my parts, so that I can then find compassion for myself in this way, right? And then what I find happens is then I can become curious and compassionate about other people and about their defense mechanisms and their parts. And, if you're hearing some of the team of women who are saying things like, well, what about her? And all of these outer facing critics, being able to find some compassion for their protective system, because that's what they grew up with, being told, don't do this, don't do that, don't say it this way, don't say it that way. So of course we grow up hearing those voices, and then they become louder naturally because they're actually trying to protect us in some way, to become curious, compassionate, and then I can maybe show up in more truth. And then that always I always know if I'm showing up in truth when I don't have judgments towards other people or criticisms, or thinking like, well, why did she say that? Wow, I don't like her, what have you. More, okay, let me become curious about that instead. And then I feel like the way where my system is, it really gets mirrored around that, because then I can see, okay, so where I'm at is I'm still really criticizing myself because I'm criticizing somebody else.
Right.
And that's okay too, right? Just becoming curious about, all right, so what's happening there? So I think that in finding those truths throughout the way, I'm finding more authenticity with myself.
Excellent. I love that. So let's talk. Go ahead.
Can I just add something onto that, Lisa? One thing, a theme that is like kind of standing out to me through this is that part of being a badass is being in the question. Like, I think that's counter to what sometimes people think a badass is. They think, oh, they're like super confident and they got it all together and they've got all the answers. But I think part of what we're all embodying here, expressing, is that part of being a badass is being in the question and being curious and looking for like what's beyond maybe the obvious, and not thinking that there are ultimate truths with a capital T. It's like, what's my truth in this moment? That sort of thing.
Oh, I love that so much. Yes, I totally agree. And I was going to jump in and say something similar, but Lisa, you really said, how do we find hers? We got to ask. We got to just keep asking and keep asking and keep asking. And Liz, I just had one thing on the judgment. I just thought that was so great. I always joke with my clients, like, we can always tell where we're really scared because it's how we're judging other people, right? Like, it's that thing. And I always use COVID as the example. When people would get sick, people would go, well, what were you doing? Right. There was that judgment thing. You know what I'm saying? And then they'd get sick and they're like, ah, crap. No, I got to judge me the same way I judged you. And and it's like this idea that like, whenever we're judging someone else, I always joke that your ego's in the corner doing push-ups ready to knock you out. Like, it's like, keep judging them. Like, I just like, how do we break that cycle? And Liz, you just said that so beautifully and so generously of like, wow, that's fascinating that I'm doing that. I wonder what I'm scared of. And if we can laugh at it, and to Spencer's point, stay in the question of it and just be like, did you see what I just did? Oh my gosh. Right. If we can actually be like that about ourselves, that's pretty badass.
Yes. I love that. And actually, Liz, I was coming because Liz kind of hit on kind of what I wanted my next kind of question to be, which is, all right, that judgment, it's sort of those limits, right? Because this idea of oh, I'm judgmental, like hearing the judgment and recognizing it. And I don't know, and recognizing that we're judging and then asking, well, why am I doing that? What's going on with me? What's concerning me? What's my fear? I don't know that that's an easy thing to do. So I guess my question is, how do we tap into that? How do we find that? How do we stay in the question? What are the things we can do to open that up for ourselves, right? Liz, you want to start?
Yeah.
Anybody?
Sure. Yeah. So what I like to do is become curious about why that part of me is judging, right? Mm-hmm. And really, find ways, and through writing or some type of therapy, or what have you, whatever your go-to is, and just becoming really curious. Okay, well, why am I feeling critical of myself or that person? And honestly, if you stay with it, you will find why. You will find the why if you stay curious and not say, because what happens too is another critic will come out about you being critical, right? And so just kind of being aware of what voices and what parts are coming out. And then, might sound crazy, but asking them, like, why, almost like it's a separate entity, like, why are you feeling critical right now? Because it's a part of us that is usually pretty young. It started a long time ago.
So before we move on and have the rest of you answer that question, I think I want to just kind of scooch back a bit and just say, what does that actually sound like when we're being critical and judgmental? How do we recognize that? Because I think sometimes you probably don't know. If you're just kind of going along and doing your thing, you don't know. Right. And I would say personally that for me, it probably took years of it just not feeling right, just it being a little bit off always, just like, before I started to go therapy a lot and then started getting fed the questions that I should be asking and then learning to ask those questions. But I'm just curious, for someone who hasn't done that, what would you say to them to be able to recognize what Liz is talking about here, which is that critic, that judgment, that thing? What does it look like, sound like, and feel like, you think?
Such a good question. I will always say it's when you're considering yourself special, and that can go either way, right? And I don't mean special like I'm so great, but it's like going back to the
well, but also I'm so great.
But also, have you seen me? It's like, okay. So anytime you try to lift yourself up out of humanity. Okay, so going back to the COVID thing, we all have bodies. That thing's a virus. Like, come on. Like, if you have a body, you can get it. The end. Like, there's nothing there. Any one of us can get a diagnosis. Any one of us can get a call. Hey, your son's in prison. Any one of us can get a call about somebody lied or cheated. And it goes for the good stuff too, right? Mm-hmm. So I think anytime we're trying to lift ourselves up out of humanity, and I think this happens a lot in the coaching circles, right? It's like, our lives are supposed to be perfect. It's like, what? I'm sorry, did you leave your humanity? Like, what are you talking about? Like, no, life can still happen to any one of us. And I think anytime we start, well, that would never happen to me. I think it can sound like that. Mm-hmm. And it can also be like, what are you doing? That sort of thing. I call those adult temper tantrums. I love that when you're at the post office. Is there not another teller? Like that, that's the adult temper tantrum, right? I call that. You might as well be a 5-year-old banging on it. Like, what are you doing? Like that sort of thing. Like anytime we start, and I think the real key for me, or what I've come to play with, and I exaggerate with all this stuff, is when we can't laugh. When you can't laugh, you're definitely in judgment, and usually of self. But that you're not listening, like that's sort of an energy. It's different if there's a boundary violation and there's actually something that's happened that needs to be addressed. But usually if there's a boundary violation, you're addressing it, you can be in the moment with somebody and not attack. But once we start to get that attacking voice and you've started to lift yourself, to separate yourself from other people in any way, that wouldn't happen to me. I would never do like those sorts of things. That to me is what it sounds like.
Yeah. I lost my mind and asked somebody that question the other day. Like, why do you think you're special? Like, why do you think you're so special? And it was actually about something that they were beating themselves up about. So it was kind of a shocking question. I am still waiting on an answer. So we will see if said individual talks to me. I don't know.
That's so funny, but it does go both ways. Like I could never do that too. Oh, I can't do that. Only she can do that. Like, it doesn't matter when you try to make yourself special, either end, there's a judgment. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I love how you brought that together for us there, Sarah, because I think sometimes it's hard. You're saying, oh, but how does it sound? What does it look like? What does it feel like? We're being judgmental. What we're being critical. What does that feel like? So I love that. Yeah. Spencer, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I love what Sarah said on that with recognizing like our thoughts or our words with it. There also, I think, can be physical cues. Like if we just start to get aware and tune in, if we even can have enough awareness when we recognize maybe from things like Sarah said of, oh, I'm being judgmental, notice what's happening in your body as well. Because there's things, it's so funny. I always think back to the movie Over the Hedge, which is an animated kids movie. One of the animals makes reference to how anytime anything's like off, his butt tingles. So and it was like such a crazy, outrageous comment, of course, because it was a kid's movie and there was a butt reference. But it's like, I think we all have some physical thing, whether it be like feeling like we're clogged in our throat or that feeling in the pit of our stomach. I mean, there were times even like when my kids were younger, when I'd feel myself like losing my cool with them, not that I was like physically abusing them, but when I'd be getting angry at them, coming from a place of, certainly judging them, being upset with like, how could you have done that thing? And I started to notice there are definitely physical sensations that equate to that. And so it's something that over time I've developed more awareness of, where I'm like, sometimes I'll notice the physical thing before I'm aware of the thoughts and the words. And then I'm like, oh, that thing is happening again. So just even feeling like your hair is, like your hair is standing up, like just different things that'll happen.
Yeah,
I love that, the somatic experience, because we, all that stuff we hold in our bodies, right under the neck. And unless, your hair is tingling or whatever, but usually it's something that if you're aware of it, you can hone in on it even more. Say, all right, so this sense is right here. So how can I really flesh that out and see what's happening for me?
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. Ultimately, that's all a fear response. I mean, if you think to like Course in Miracles kind of stuff, of everything is either love or fear, when we're getting those like, kind of physical reactions, it's totally coming from fear.
Speak a little bit more about that for me, please, Spencer.
Yeah, because the trauma is held in the body. Held in the body.
Yeah,
fear starts when we're little. So yeah.
Yeah. And ultimately it's a survival response. I mean, it's so great. I led a workshop a month or two ago with amazing human beings and all super successful. And I asked them, what's your number one goal in life? And they all were like, to be self-actualized, and to this and to that. And I'm like, okay, this is perfect, because really your number one goal is to survive. And we forget that. And then when we experience fear, when we feel not enough, when we feel threatened, we forget that it's like the most base form of our human wiring is to have when there's a threat to our existence in some way. And most of us aren't getting chased by saber-toothed tigers anymore. So it may not be a physical threat to our existence, but now it's that identity or ego connection of like, it's a threat to our identity or our ego, or what people will think of us, or how we're seen or perceived.
Right.
Yeah. For me,
our identity and our tribe, right? One of the scariest things for us is to be alienated from our tribe, whatever that looks like.
To get kicked out of the cave. Because if we got kicked out of the cave, it was certain death. You can't make it on your own if you're kicked out of the cave.
I'm all right with being kicked out of the cave, I think. But for me,
well, I'm joking. You are too funny. You are too funny.
I'm joking.
That's where like modern life and our like still wired caveman instincts conflict. Yeah, modern life is like, heck with y'all. I don't need you guys.
But it's interesting, because for me, it's definitely an ego thing. So anything, I think the place where I've always gotten the most sort of riled up is if I feel like somebody is questioning my ability to do something or my expertise in a way, I will have your head on a platter for my breakfast. So, and that was the thing that I needed to understand why that was, right? Like why that was. And I'm a lot better with it now, still not perfect, but, you know, and I think that that's a long way to go, but clearly, I love what you talked about with the physical thing, because it's not like, I feel like my blood runs cold a little bit. And like you said, Spencer, it's just kind of recognizing blood's running cold. This person is triggering me. Let us walk away now, or it's going to get very ugly. And getting to that point of recognizing it and then coming back and having the conversation if a conversation needs to be had. Right.
Yeah.
So
100%.
I absolutely love that you pointed out the physical, and that you pointed out like what it looks like. I love that, because I think that that's going to be valuable. So how do we get over ourselves? Because clearly it's ourselves, right?
Yes.
It's us.
Yeah, and I like what you said there, Lisa, when you said, you know, and then I have a long way to go, because that's the truth, is as long as we're in our bodies, we usually have, you know, quite a distance to go, normally to go, whatever that looks like for you. But just knowing, hey, I'm not going to be whatever term is, you know, self-actualized or what have you, one of these terms that are popular. I'm not going to be, it's a work in progress. I'm a work in progress. And if we can find ways to say, you know, and that's okay, right? Tomorrow is another day, and I'm a work in progress.
So that's fantastic. So how do we get over ourselves? Because again, it's ourself in the way, right? So it's sort of like the self-actualization, the pinnacle, wherever it is, because I think we feel like there's a pinnacle, there's a place. How do we get over it? Because it's our brains, it's our body, it's our fear, it's our instinct, it's all those things that sits between us and whatever greatness we think we want to achieve.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, totally. I think it's ultimately about moving forward in the face of fear. But the way I think to do that is in alignment with, again, coming back to who you really are. And even as Sarah brought up about what do you really want, this like being really clear on who you are, or maybe who you aspire to be, who you're reinventing yourself to be moment by moment. Because, you know, no one just like, I don't know, there's no like formula for who you have to be. So who are you really? And always aligning back into that, who you are, what you're here for, what really matters, and recognizing in those moments when the fear kicks in, like, oh, okay, that's just my humanity at play. That's the fear. And now I get to move forward in the face of it. I get to take off that armor. I get to make that leap. I feel like so many of us, in fact, I just had this experience with my own coach a week or so ago. I feel like so many of us are like standing on the edge of the cliff. And this, I know Sarah talks about upper limit stuff as well. And to me, this is essentially that. It's like you're on the edge of the cliff and you're ready to make this big, scary leap. And it's like, you got to make the leap. And with my coach last week, I felt like she kind of threw me over the cliff. I said to her on the next call, I'm like, I did not enjoy that call at all. But I said at the same time, I get it. I've been like, I'm going to jump. And she's like, just jump.
And somebody just walks by and just goes.
Exactly.
Yeah. Crazy.
Yeah.
Sarah, did you?
Yeah, I was going to jump in on that one too. I mean, I think that's absolutely correct. And my definition of that is confidence, right? So confidence is just a belief in yourself to figure it out, which is that whole idea. And I love, Spencer, I'm so happy you brought up the physical sensations, right? When you feel that, to just be like, can I trust myself to figure this out? And ultimately, like, I wish I had like here's your formula. Don't we all wish that? We'd all be bazillionaires if we had here's the formula. That's why I hate that stuff so much, because there isn't one, right? There's like ways to sort of figure out how you work. And for me, the ultimate way to do that, I think it's two things. One, you got to trust yourself. Like, we have to trust past Lisa. We have to trust past Liz. We have to trust past Spencer and past Sarah, and say, at every single step of the way, we did the very best we could with what we had.
Yes.
Nobody wakes up in the morning and goes, how can I totally screw up my whole life right now? Like, nobody wakes up and says that, right? So it's like almost a turning back. And there's that internal forgiveness piece of like, I trust me. And I trust me to also learn from that. But I also trust me to feel those feelings, both physical and emotional, and to do something with those. I'm going to trust me to continue to move forward. And I think for so many women, the element of self-betrayal, meaning you don't listen to your instincts, you don't listen to your internal voice, you don't give yourself permission to go after what you want. You do stand on the edge of the cliff, right? It's like, I don't trust me to do this. And healing that self-betrayal is very different from past mistakes where you didn't understand, right? And you're like, oh, I trust myself there. But then it's like, oh, I knew and I didn't do it. I signed on with the wrong partner. I dated that guy I shouldn't have dated. I signed it. That, I think those moments to go back and really do the work to forgive ourselves of like, listen, woman, you did the best you could in that moment. Like, I'm going to trust us to do this again, and to forgive for those past moments. I think so much of what we see when we see women judging each other or holding each other down, it's that, hey, I screwed up. You don't get to have the chance I didn't have. There's that feeling. And it's really brutal. And it's not until we tell the truth about those like little micro self-betrayals, right? And we heal those, that we can kind of role model the way for other people to come and join us. But we also can call each other out like, dude, you are being so hard on yourself. What is going on there? Talk to me about that. Let's go. And then as challenges come up and you feel the physical sensations as well as the emotional sensations, you have some sort of roadmap to use of like, where have I not forgiven myself? And I need somebody to call me out on this and hold the space, not me, but like hold me while I go through this kind of a feeling. And I think that's the 1-2 punch that really gets us through these moments.
Yeah.
That's my 2 cents. Sticking
Yeah.
to it.
Oh my God. Oh, stick to it, honey. Oof, y'all are giving me life today. All right. On this Monday. All right. So I want to kind of go back to something Liz started to say, right? About, finding a way to sort of tap into like understanding, dismantling is what I'm going to call it, that judgment, that criticism, and talk a little bit about how you do it. So for me, what that looks like is, and what that started to look like is just finding gratitude, right, in my day. And I know people get tired of us as coaches saying, oh, be grateful, write a gratitude journal, do the have a gratitude practice. But it really does work. And it seems crazy that it should work. But when you stop and you think about just what you have and what you've gotten. And I also like what you were saying there to kind of wrap this in, Sarah, what you did, you worked with what you had and then being able to move forward with it, right? Gratitude is one that I would say, all right, that's how we kind of tap into the self, tap into our awesomeness and sort of understanding what it is and how we move forward with it. So I'm just curious if either of the three of you have any ideas around that in terms of how we tap into and find our awesomeness, besides the physical, besides, that stuff. How do we find that?
I like what you said, and I like the word that you use, dismantling, because what I believe to be true is oftentimes inside we do feel kind of tangled up, right? And we can't, and in that feeling of entanglement, we don't have access to ourselves. We don't have access to our compassion, our creativity, our clarity. So for me, what I like to do is untangle and then concretize all of these pieces, right? Kind of pull them all out and look at all of this and really get some clarity around what's really happening for me. And in the untangling, it creates space for all of that good stuff. And I find that, usually I'm blended with one of these parts if there's an agenda. Where I know that I'm in my self essence is when there's no agenda and I'm just feeling grounded, compassionate, I have courage and that type of thing. I'm blended when there's an agenda. That's how I know that I'm sitting in myself, in my grounded self.
Mm-hmm. Thoughts? Feelings?
Well, I think she just grounded all of us. We're like, yes.
Yes, we agree.
No, I think, but really, but Liz, when you were saying that, like, that's exactly how it feels. I'm thinking even in business, I can always tell when a client's off or something's happening, or even for myself, when I'm like, I'm running a launch or something, there's such a difference between trying to like cause a result and like being the result. And that sounds so cheesy. And I don't mean to sound all woo woo and stuff, but there really is something to just being still, saying what needs to be said, sharing what needs to be shared, and then holding still. And I love how you just described that. When you were talking about that, I was actually just thinking of last instance. I had a goal for a course. And at the last one, I'm like, I know who it is, and I know, and it's good. And I didn't even call them, nothing. And boom, last minute, of course, it came in, right? And it was that person. But all day long, I just knew it was there was none of that. And I think that is part of being a badass too, is that stillness, that peace that can come from like, look, I have done my job. I have worked on forgiveness. I have done what I need to do, and finding that space, Liz, when you said, when we're all tangled up, we don't have access to that. I love that visual. I think that's correct. And then for a more tangible thing, Lisa, because you asked a really specific question, like, how do we find ourselves over the thing? I do a thing that I share with everybody. And I love it. It's a competency journal. And when I really have people do this, like really go for it, I make them do the last 10 years. And they have to write down every single win. And it's a pain in the neck. Thank God for social media, because they can go back and see what happened in their lives. But really, like, I'm talking every tough conversation with a spouse, every time somebody asked for a raise, every time you did something challenging in your family, you just go down. And then on top of that, you write any compliments somebody gives you. First of all, it takes so much energy to do that. People are like, what? And they recognize on a daily basis how much they're affecting the world around them, and how much people are enjoying it and seeing it and participating in it that we just miss, right? Because we got the thing going on. Well, I'm not really enough, and I hate that lady, and I did the thing, and I'm still mad at myself. Like, we're so busy in that sometimes we miss all of that. And I know anytime I've done a big pitch with a corporation, or someone's wants to book me to speak, or I'm signing on a new client, I have my competency journal with me. And it's a physical, nobody else knows what it is, right? But it's a physical reminder of like, Sarah, you've done these things, going back to trusting past, like, you've done this, you've got this, keep going. And sometimes I think we need those physical things outside of us as well to remind us of the actual truth, which is we're out there in the world doing what we're here to do. And that freaking matters. And when you're walking the walk day in and day out, it's very easy to forget that.
Sarah, I so absolutely love this, because I told Liz this, I started to tell her this story, and I don't know if we shared it on the podcast or not, but there is someone I've known for years, and he called me just about a month ago and said, hey, I want to figure out how we can work together. And for me, I was like, what? Why? I don't lawyer, you're a lawyer, you're an investment banker. Why do you, eh? But what he said to me was so very interesting. So this person has been watching me since we've met. And he's saying, no, you are living the life you want to live. I want to be able to do that as well. So I want to partner with you. And I'm like, what? So I still, for a moment, sat in this what place of like, huh? But without recognizing that people, my takeaway from that conversation was, people are watching us. People are watching you as well, right? So while we may think we don't have these accomplishments, so that competency journal, I love that, Sarah. It is, people are watching and they're adding up your competencies for you as well. And something like that may happen, or something else, and they're drawn to you in a certain way. And I'm not, I'm not saying that to gas myself up, but I'm also saying it to gas myself up. So, it's just sort of like, yeah, you've done stuff and you're impacting people in the world, even when you think you aren't. Mm-hmm. So competency journal, I love that, Sarah. I love that takeaway. Absolutely. Write it down. Write it down. Spencer, do you have some thoughts?
Yeah, so it's perfect. I was actually going to bring that up as, in fact, one of the coaches I work with, ironically enough, refers to it as a badass list. Here we are talking about how to be a badass.
So then now it's a badass list.
I love it. A badass list. And she tells everyone, like, do your badass list. And she says, even go back to childhood, like everything, every win, every accomplishment, every good thing. And from my perspective, what can be valuable about that is that we are very evidence driven. That's how our whole world exists for us, is that we have thoughts or interpretations of things, and then we find evidence for it. And it's just part of how our brain works and filters out the excess to focus in on what seems like the important stuff. So it works with that aspect of our brain brain that is very evidence driven. It's like now you have a list of evidence, of factual evidence of how badass you are. So that's one piece of it. I love too what Liz said about being present. I was a yoga instructor for 15 years. And so just like being present, being still, allowing space is huge. And one other thing I was going to pass on that I love this reframe, a course that I did some workshops and trainings with, sets it up as a statement of, I'm inventing the possibility of being. Like what you want to be or what experience you want to be having or how you want to tap into that badassery. Sometimes I think if we just say, oh, well, I'm a badass, I'm confident now, I'm brave, I'm this, I'm that. Part of the rest of your mind is like, BS, no, you're not. You know better than that. So it's not like either you are or you aren't. It's inventing the possibility of being brave, strong, connected, powerful, badass, whatever it might be. And so I really like that reframe as something that any of us can tap into in any moment, no matter what's happening, no matter how challenged we feel, no matter what fear instinct is kicking in, no matter what the results around us are showing, you can always in any moment tap into that beingness, but as inventing the possibility of being X, whatever X is for you in that moment.
Oh my God, I love it. So many gems
Inventing
today.
the possibility of being a badass.
Mm-hmm.
Much better than acting as if, right? And even in some 12-step programs, there's the act as if and fake it till you make it.
Make it. Yep.
I mean,
there's a part of you that knows you're faking it.
That's right. That's right. And then, right.
Wow.
And then it can feed feeling like more of a fraud when we know we're faking it.
Right.
Then it's like, boy, no, I'm really a fraud and imposter. I'm totally full of it. If they only knew what was going on.
Right.
But
if they only knew.
You can always invent the possibility of being and then live into that possibility.
Love that.
Love it.
Oh my God. Okay. So I just want to talk to y'all for the rest of the day, but
me too.
Okay. I know.
This was the fastest hour, Lisa,
ever.
I think, ever on our podcast. Podcast, right?
I can't, right? Like, it's just so good. And unfortunately, we all have businesses to run. So I'm just sort of like, well, I guess we have to go back to work now, I suppose. Oh my God. But it's been so amazing and so lovely to have you here with us for our 100th episode to talk about this. But, before we go, I want to give us all an opportunity to really just say the one thing, right? Like, what's the one thing? What is the one thing you want our audience to hear, people listening to this entire conversation to hear before we go off and do less fun things for the rest of the day? Because this has been so much fun.
Honesty leads to badassery.
Honesty leads to badassery. I'm with that. Be honest with yourself. I love that, Liz.
Gosh, this is hard to narrow down to one.
I know, right? How dare I?
I mean, holy cannoli. I think one of the things I hope people take, especially in the frenetic nature of today, is that you're on track when you can feel calm. So say whatever you need to say so you can find that space.
Yeah.
Answer.
So mine, I think I haven't really used this word today, but I sort of addressed it indirectly is I think in owning our awesomeness, it's really embracing the perfection of all that you are and all that you're not. You are perfect, divine, magnificent, exactly as you are. And even for all the parts that you feel maybe missing or shoulda, coulda, woulda been different or whatever, just really embrace the perfection of all that you are and all that you're not. And you are a badass.
Oh my God, I love it. And by the way, Spencer, I think I stole that from you because I was having a conversation with a young lady and I used that exact language. I was like, you're perfect and awesome and whole. And because, it's a motherless young lady. And I am one, kind of consider myself a little bit motherless sometimes. And we were having a conversation and I used that language. So now I know where I got it from.
Yay. Oh, I love it.
And Lisa, final word.
My word would be, you got this. I think that's what I would say. You got this. 100%. Oh my God, ladies.
This was so fun and such an honor to be included on such a special episode. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh my God, this is so
Absolutely.
fun for me. And Liz, how are you feeling? This is so fun.
Oh, loved it. Loved it. Absolutely. Ladies, thank you so much for being with us. And it was just been a phenomenal conversation.
Oof.
Absolutely. I can't think of three women I'd rather spend more time with on a Monday afternoon. You guys are amazing. And it was so wonderful to be here. So happy.
Oh my God, I love it. It is absolutely the best. Thank you all so much. And
Yeah. And
Liz,
we usually end it with, you are going to be thanks for being our badass of the week, but collectively, thanking ourselves for being the badass
badasses
in our
that we
lives.
Amen, sister.
Love it.
Ooh, love it. Thank y'all.